All right, welcome everybody. I'll now call the meeting to order. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, physical distancing measures are in place and the committee is meeting virtually. Members of the committee, the executive management team, and the city clerk are participating via video conference. Senior leadership team is not visible, but are available to answer any questions that we have on the agenda. We have one delegation and one presentation this evening, and I think in baseball that counts as a doubleheader. The first delegation that we have this evening is Hannah Bregman, and she wants to talk to us about walkability in Barrie, especially in the Urban Growth Center. So, Hannah, there you are. Welcome to City Building, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Do I share my screen? And I've been told that someone's going to be presenting for me.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you.
Works.
Thank you very much. I've decided to focus my walkability presentation on Bradford Street. Next slide, please. About me, my name is Hannah. I have civil engineering and planning education from the University of Waterloo, and I worked as a transportation planner in the past. Next slide, please. Why Bradford? Next slide, please. The potential of Bradford Street is unparalleled in Barrie, and to create our next walkable community. It's part of the Urban Growth Center connecting downtown Barrie to Allendale. It already has the highest public transit coverage with most routes passing here around the bay. And there's also the GO station. It's the closest street to the beach after Lakeshore, and the proposed Fish Auditorium is also here. Bradford is due for redevelopment and is currently undergoing an EA. Now's the time to choose to turn into a very desirable place to live, one that will attract businesses, tourists, new residents, and high-paying jobs. Next slide, please. We can choose the future for Bradford. Next slide, please. At the top, you can see the existing cross section of Bradford, 18-meter right-of-way. At the bottom there is the proposed 34-meter right-of-way in Barrie Transportation Master Plan. The TMP calls for widening the right-of-way by almost 2 times to accommodate for future increase in traffic. This option I call the move through Bradford. There's much less space here for development, and the street is generally more dangerous and unpleasant for pedestrians due to the high traffic speeds and volumes. No one likes to sit on a patio or hang out on a sidewalk by a 5-lane wide road. An alternative option that I'm suggesting would involve widening the road at all. The widening, by the way, is 16 meters, which is 1.3 city buses wide. This option will not only be enormously cheaper, as land acquisition is not required, but would also be more walkable and pleasant street, similar to Dunlop Street downtown. The priority here is the destination, so I called it Destination Bradford. Next slide, please. The move through Bradford approach prioritizes cars, so traffic speeds and volumes are higher. The Destination Bradford approach would be prioritizing pedestrian comfort. The street becomes attractive to other modes of transportation other than driving, and Barrie receives more tax revenue due to more developable land, which can be spent on more services or reducing taxes. Recently, Council was provided a presentation on managing transportation assets and significant costs associated with road widenings. Yes, those are development charges eligible, but what about the renewal of the roadway? Has Barrie's tax base been historically sufficient enough to cover those costs? Destination Bradford is the path to financial sustainability. Move through Bradford is more of the same, with the infrastructure funding hole getting bigger and harder to get out of. Next slide, please. But what about projected growth in traffic? Don't we need to expand? This brings me to a very well-documented phenomenon called induced demand. People choose the most convenient option for mobility. If we focus the corridor on the car and make driving the most convenient, more people will drive and less will choose other modes. But if we focus the corridor on alternative modes like walkability and cycling, more people will choose to walk and bike and less people will drive. So there won't be the need for a 5-lane expansion in the first place. This is a very well-studied phenomenon, and I can personally provide 27 separate studies of varying scale, proving empirically that induced demand is real. Let's look at 2 local examples though. Next slide, please. Here are two examples of induced demand. York Region built Highway 7 to prioritize cars. It's 8 car lanes wide. Even though they have bike lanes and wide sidewalks, it's very unpleasant to walk or bike there. I've tried that myself. Traffic on Highway 7 is already very bad, but as you can see by the region's traffic projections on Highway 7, they're still projecting significant auto trip increases. So what are they going to do in the future? Keep expanding to 10 lanes? Is that going to fix it? On the other hand, Toronto restricted car movement on King Street to not allow through traffic, thereby prioritizing the streetcar. Practically overnight, 12,000 more transit boardings per day were observed on the streetcar. You hear right, 12,000 every single day. I can confidently say that at least some of those individuals were vehicle drivers because traffic travel time did not increase on parallel corridors. This is real-world evidence of local major city revitalizing a street at the expense of vehicle space with no consequences to vehicle travel time. Other findings included business turnover was lower than surrounding areas, the number of cyclists increased, 45 new amenity spaces due to freed up public road space, like I think patios, cafes, sitting parquets. Next slide, please. So is widening worth it? And the true costs of widening. Next slide, please. Widening compromises Barrie's goals to create a walkable, sustainable neighborhood, and it will not age well. Widening will result in significant capital and operating financial costs of purchasing land that could be used for housing and generating tax revenue. Widening will result in missed opportunity to create a walkable, attractive district connecting downtown and Allendale around the bay, which can attract more tourists, new residents, and high-paying jobs. It will hurt business potential on the corridor due to less development and less foot traffic. And widening will actually make car traffic worse. Expanding roadway leads to never-ending cycle of needing to expand more. The one more lane will fix it fallacy. All for what? Accommodating pass-through traffic, which could be redirected to N Street or Highway 400, especially when the new Dunlop interchange. Let's make Bradford a destination and not a thoroughfare. Next slide, please. For next steps, I would like to suggest we add the destination Bradford option within the EA for further study. We should plan for the trips we want. The target modal splits for the trip generation should proxy the area the destination Bradford will be and not what it is now. And to create a walkable neighborhood, we need to break out of the auto-focused loop of projecting traffic, getting that traffic, projecting traffic, getting traffic of induced demand. Let's make Bradford an attractive district, part of the downtown waterfront destination. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Hannah. Very interesting. And I already see one card up. So any committee members have questions? Councillor Aylwin.
Thank you, Councillor Rietma, and thank you, Hannah, for that presentation. Fantastic and interesting work. I do want to go to our staff, Andrea Miller, and for your context, Hannah, Andrea is the General Manager of Infrastructure and Growth Management at the city. So her division at the city would be overseeing the Bradford Street EA process. Ms. Miller, so it's my understanding that we have a consultant hired for the EA. Is it part of the scope of this project to look at active transportation and pedestrian friendly options on the Bradford Street corridor?
Through you, Chair Rietma, to Councillor Aylwin, yes, and it is very timely that Hannah has come to speak to the committee right now because the EA is just kicking off, as you know, and certainly those will be things we'll be discussing. Ms. Banfield is on the line, and if she would like to provide any additional details, if that short answer is not sufficient, then she is available to give you more details.
Ms. Banfield, did you have anything to add as well?
Thank you, Chair Rietma, to Councillor Aylwin. So as Ms. Miller indicated, the notice of the kickoff to the EA is probably going to be issued at the very end of this month. So again, super timely. So it's always going to be about exploring the feasibility to improve kind of safety and overall operations in that entire area. So, so definitely we are open to all ideas. And as I said, we're really appreciative of the of the presentation this evening, and looking forward to seeing Ms. Bregman at some of the open houses and all those events.
That's great. Thank you, Ms. Banfield. And thank you again, Hannah. And I do have an opportunity that I want to talk to you about, so I'll follow up with you after the meeting, and hopefully we can have a chat about that. But thank you so much for that presentation.
All right. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none. Any questions from other members of council? Councilor Morales.
Thank you, Chair Rima. To Ms. Bregman, this is a really good presentation. My apologies I was late on this, but I did get a chance to review it. What made you want to do this? Like, it's such a detailed presentation. I love where you're coming from on this. And again, I pulled up your letter that you wrote to Barrie today. I think was over a month and a half ago, about how many times walkability is mentioned in our OP and how our roads really don't show that yet. So I guess my first question is, what motivated you to do, again, such a detailed application? Obviously, I see your educational background, but it happens in the past, but it's not often that we get this level of detail from residents. So I'm just wondering what made you just engage us this way.
Ms. Bregman.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I really like Barrie, and I think Barrie has a lot of potential that other cities don't have. It's a beautiful city, and the lake is right there, and there's a lot to attract tourists already and new residents. And I do see that there was walkability mentioned all over the official plan. But when I saw that Bradford is going to be widened to 5 lanes and the right of way is going to be 34 meters, I thought I should make a presentation and speak up, because I wasn't sure if I wasn't sure if it's best practices or if this option is going to be even considered, not widening the road at all. Because as you know, I did take planning courses in university, and I'm very interested in it. So I read a lot about it, and from what I know, a lot of times cars, like a lot of cars, high traffic is not compatible with walkability. So I think Bradford, there should be a choice there. What do we want to see on it? Do we want to see a lot of traffic, or do we want to see more people?
Yeah, one of your slides says the potential of Bradford is unparalleled in Barrie. I was wondering, do you have, and not to put you on the spot, but do you have similar comments about Bayfield Street? That's always a street that I've kind of looked at and gone, that definitely has a lot of potential. I'm wondering if that has been part of your analysis, or just Bradford for now.
The reason why I chose Bradford is because it goes around the bay, it goes around the beach, and then it also connects downtown to Allendale, and there's so many paths that connect that street to the beach, and I think it's going to be a very desirable place to live, very desirable place for businesses. Bayfield is also a very major street, which could also have a lot of potential, and yes, Bayfield would also be a very good corridor to study as well, to study the same thing, because it also has a lot of potential. The town, it's also very close to downtown.
Okay, in your analysis that you did, do you recommend any specific densities on Bradford? So when I see that you did the comparison of Highway 7 York, aka not so favorable, to King Street is favorable, the one difference that stands out at me, which might have been a factor that probably allowed the walkability and the integration to be easier, is the fact that it's I've called it something in the part. It's density supported transit, or it's transit supported density. So basically, the density exists, so therefore it allows public transportation to exist. It allows walkability, and it makes things be able to come together. Whereas somewhere like Bayfield, for example, at this current present time, there's not really residential that fronts Bayfield for the most part north of the highway. And that's why you get a little more like it's more of a mini highway, a throughway, commercial, kind of that car culture. So is there any specific like density targets that you have an opinion on from the documents that you looked at the city of Barrie that you would encourage us to hit, or was that different than your analysis?
Yeah, density for sure helps to bring people on the street. It doesn't have to necessarily be skyscrapers, but it just generally more density and more mid-rise potentially everywhere. And I know that specifically Bradford is due for redevelopment. And I think if we widen it, there'll be even less density because there'll be less places we could build in. Especially just speaking for Bradford for now, there's the sewage treatment plant on one side and single detached houses on the other. And if we widen it to 34-meter right of way, I wonder will be any space for density on the other side of the sewage plant, on the other side of the corridor, because the widening is about 16 meters, and there will be less, I guess, land for redevelopment. So, but I do agree, density is very important, and I think in general in Barrie there's the need for more development to decrease the housing prices naturally through more development, and for sure Bayfield would also need to be a bit more densified, not necessarily with skyscrapers, but generally walk-up apartments, maybe loosening the requirements, the zoning requirements for like parking requirements, and just generally having more density, and especially near transit corridors. But I do think it's more pleasant and more safe for families to live near a less highway road. So
Yep.
If Bradford or Bayfield were to keep getting expanded into highway roads, then it will become less desirable place to live.
Amazing. And my last question, Chair Reitma, to Ms. Banfield. I know when we do like community, like we do those little, like back in pre-COVID, we used to do the Bristol boards in the rotunda. We would put EAs, people could come in, they could produce things of that nature. Do we right now have some sort of like contact list, email list, where anytime we do something significant for planning, like planning says, hey, the NEOP is being reviewed, or hey, stormwater management is being reviewed. Do we currently have that kind of, I guess, email list?
Through you, Chair Reitma, to Councillor Morales, there are many ways that we update members of the public about any city initiative, and we always say there's the outreach that we have to do, and that's dictated by whatever legislation we're working with in terms of notifying impacted property owners and so on and so forth. And then we have, and those are usually done by letters, not registered letters, but mailed out letters. And then we have the whole suite of things that we work with our communications team. They tweet, they Facebook, they use our website. If it's in a particular ward councillors, we use your resources to share with your constituents. We do things on Building Barrie, and we can get addresses, email addresses from people on Building Barrie. And then as soon as anybody attends a virtual workshop, we have their information from the very beginning, like after that, the beginning of the project, and then we continue to update them throughout the project. So there's a whole bunch of things and a whole bunch of ways that we get in touch with people when these projects are happening. Okay,
and the reason I asked the question is the fact that we had somebody like Ms. Bregman reach out to us and engage us is spectacular. And I would, again, if she wishes to, I would love to add her some sort of email list for policies and emerging and feedback and a focus group or industry feedback, because, while she may not be a, that I know of, a multi-million-dollar developer or owning a planning company, her insight, her perspective, especially not only from her technical perspective, from her kind of a millennial perspective, I think is invaluable. And I think that, if we were lucky enough to capture somebody like Ms. Bregman who reached out to us, it'd be great to even capture people who don't necessarily proactively reach out to us. But if we have that kind of email list and people feel like, hey, they're going to keep me in the loop. Anytime they're going to make a major update, I'm going to get an email. I'm going to maybe be asked for my opinion. So again, if Ms. Bregman is willing to, I hope this isn't just a one-off presentation, that we can kind of keep the communication channels open with her and maybe, continue the discussion. Because again, great presentation. I almost thought this was a staff presentation, to be honest with you. That's how well it was done, Ms. Bregman. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. I just have one question of staff. Do we need to pass anything in or give you direction on this, or is this presentation sufficient for you to take this as part of your job jar, if you will? Ms. Miller?
Chair Rima, absolutely. We'll take this information. We'll follow up appropriately and use it in the EA work, but also in our official plan work and other work that's happening in both the development services and infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Well, Ms. Bregman, thank you very much for your presentation. I suppose in coming months we'll have further presentations from you on Bayview and on Blake Street, and there's probably 20 other streets that we could have a look at in the same vein. Well, thank you very much for giving us your time and your insights. Very interesting.
Thank you very much. I would love to keep the communication channel open. Thank you.
All right. Well, you're welcome here anytime. Our next presentation is concerning the alternative fuel study that's been ongoing for a while. Mara Bullock is from WSP is going to give us the presentation on this one. So, Ms. Bullock, the floor is yours. Now, there we are.
Hello, let me just share my screen. I want to share this one. Okay, can you just confirm that you can see the slide in full mode?
Yes, we can.
Not the speaker's notes. Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you. Good evening. My name is Mara Bullock, and I am the National Smart Mobility Lead at WSP Canada. As the project manager on this project, I'm really happy to be here tonight to share the results of the alternative fuel study that we undertook for Barrie Transit and also the Barrie corporate fleet. I'm joined by my colleague Inacia Franca, who has undertaken analysis on this and many other projects in Canada and around the world, and who will be supporting me through the Q&A period. So tonight, what I'm going to do is provide a short background and overview of the methodology that we followed. The key focus of my presentation is going to be on the key findings and recommendations for the transit fleet and the corporate fleet. We will take questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to put them into the chat as we move through the deck. So climate change is a pressing issue around the world, and the City of Barrie is actively engaged in finding ways to move to a state of net zero carbon emissions. WSP was retained to investigate the feasibility of converting transit and corporate vehicles to alternative fuels such as battery electric, hydrogen, and compressed natural gas, or CNG, as a way to create a more sustainable future. Input has been received from the Barrie team working to develop the net zero carbon emission strategy, and the reports prepared under this project will provide input into the final document as well. There's a lot of analysis work with very high levels of complexity that are undertaken to assess the feasibility of alternative fuels. The first thing that we did was a tour of the operations facility where we got an understanding of expansion plans, and that provided input into our analysis. We undertook a high-level analysis to shortlist the technologies that we wanted to consider for a more in-depth analysis. We developed conceptual designs of supporting infrastructure required for charging and refueling at the different operations center, and also had conversations with local utilities. A triple bottom line cost benefit analysis was completed, along with recommendations on how to proceed and the next steps to be undertaken. These same steps that are outlined here were undertaken for both the transit fleet and the corporate fleet, although the methodologies differed when considering a fixed route service versus a variable route. So we're first going to start by going through the transit fleet perspective. So battery electric and CNG were the two shortlisted technologies that were analyzed for the transit fleet. These options really reflect the technologies that are currently in operation or in pilot operation, such as with the TTC, and are therefore considered more mature. There is still a tremendous amount of research and investment in battery electric vehicles, and this is expected to continue for the next 5 to 10 years. Changes in battery composition and size are driving range increases, and new business models are evolving to consider the life cycle of the battery. In their recent provincial budget, there was an emphasis placed on supporting Ontario in developing and producing batteries from material exploration through to end of life. There's a number of factors that we needed to consider when understanding how a battery is going to perform along a fixed route. So physical attributes such as the type of the bus, the weight of the onboard equipment and the riders, the topography of the route, the weather, and the corresponding HVAC loads are just a few of these elements. To address these complexities, WSP created a tool called BOLT that models the interactions and the dependencies of all of these factors. The modeling that we undertook showed that 24% of the current schedule could be serviced by electric buses, and that 1.3 electric buses would be required to replace each diesel bus. The model also calculated the peak electrical load and that 3 chargers would be required for every 4 buses. Additional work will be required in the future to optimize the schedule to support full battery electric rollout. And also we use the outputs from BOLT here to feed into the cost benefit analysis. When we looked at the CNG side of things, we did not need to do a detailed route analysis as the CNG buses operate in a very similar manner to the current diesel buses. In order to complete the analysis, we prepared a scenario, but we should note that the actual implementation may vary, and therefore these results are illustrative. As mentioned on the previous slide, there are 1.3 battery electric buses needed for each current diesel bus. You can see this reflected in the difference between the yellow and blue bars. In addition, the charging stations take up physical space in the O&M facility, and therefore the facility expansion plan for 2026 and the new facility will be required to address this issue, as well as planning for growth. We also expect that the new facility will be required 1 to 2 years earlier than the business as usual case for battery electric vehicles. Other work will include electrical substations and backup generators. For the CNG scenario, there will be external refueling stations provided to minimize reconstruction of existing facilities. And as there's a 1-to-1 replacement with diesel buses, facility expansion and additions would proceed on the same schedule as currently planned. So as you can see from the graph on the right, the analysis assumed that the rollout of electric or CNG vehicles would begin in 2027, and it would be fully complete by 2038. This approach was based on a life cycle replacement model where vehicles were only transitioned once they reached the end of life. This figure shows the results of the analysis of the 2 alternative fuel options, as well as the business as usual case. Business as usual is shown on the left, the CNG option is in the middle, and the battery electric option is on the right. The blue represents the fleet CapEx, the orange represents the net OpEx, and the gray represents the infrastructure CapEx. As expected, the total emissions are significantly lower for battery electric vehicles than for the other 2 options. As this is a cumulative total from 2021 to 2041, and there are diesel buses up until 2037, that's why the number doesn't reach 0. In addition, the calculation takes into account the current and future plans for the clean energy percentages within the Ontario supply chain. Battery electric vehicles offer approximately 107,000 tons of CO2 equivalent savings. However, the capital costs of the infrastructure and the fleet are 35% or 135.9 million higher than the base case. When we look at the CNG scenario, we can see that there's 20,000 tons of CO2 equivalent reductions and 3.2% or 12.7 million in savings over the base case. So Canada has pledged to be a carbon neutral economy by 2050. And if we look at adopting an electric fleet, we're going to reduce the well-to-wheel emissions by 80% when we compare it to the business as usual case at year 2041, while the CNG conversion reduces well-to-wheel emissions by 16% when we compare to a business as usual case at 2041. The analysis that we did revealed that both battery electric and CNG are feasible alternative fuels, and that there's a trade-off between cost and carbon emissions. As a result of the city's future net zero carbon emission strategy, battery electric is the recommended technology. The next steps include to dedicate staff to lead a pilot and to support fleet transition, to identify funding, to engage with the utility, to kick off a pilot project opportunity, and to complete an operational analysis and fleet transition and deployment plan that would consider things like a resilience strategy and detailed costing for the facility expansions and infrastructure upgrades. I'm now going to switch gears to the corporate fleet study. And as I mentioned, we'll take questions at the end on both. So with the corporate fleet, the types of vehicles and the required functionality vary widely. So instead of focusing on one type of technology conversion for the entire fleet, like we looked at for transit, the initial assessment of technology looked at various scenarios that had varying degrees of conversion to alternative technologies. Since some of the city's work is event-driven and therefore vehicles that are reliably available are required to keep the city safe. So if you consider snowplows as an example. For much of the city's fleet, conversion to electric vehicles is feasible. The opportunity for the biggest emissions reduction is in the heavy-duty vehicle space, the plows, the salters, sanders, dump trucks, and some specialized equipment. Unfortunately, the cleanest technology, battery electric, doesn't support the functionality of these vehicles at this time. And so there may not be alternative fuel options for some of them. So even when we take a look at the most aggressive scenario, we're limited in terms of the potential for emissions reduction. So this slide shows the different scenarios that were considered for each of the different classes of vehicle, and we moved forward with scenario 3. So as we mentioned in the transit discussion, there may be multiple paths to implementation. And what we're showing here is one scenario. It's the implementation of scenario 3. And that would be phased in order to provide sufficient time to install the required infrastructure and to secure funding. In addition, we know staff need to be trained both to maintain the devices as well as to drive them. And similar to the transit fleet, conversion was based on aligning with the replacement with end of life. So again, it was assumed that the earliest the alternative technology would be implemented was 2025 in this case, and with nearly half of the fleet being converted to electric by 2041. This figure shows the results of the analysis of the alternative fuel option as well as the business as usual case. So in the same way as last time, the business as usual is shown on the left and the alternative fuel option is shown on the right, remembering that that's a combination of a number of different alternative fuels. So the blue represents the fleet CapEx, the orange represents the net OpEx, and the gray again represents the infrastructure CapEx. So the alternative fuel scenario reduces emissions by over 4,000 tons between 2021 and 2041, while maintaining a very similar OpEx. There is an increase of 18% from the base case for the CapEx, which is primarily driven by the need for a CNG refueling station and charging infrastructure. We do expect that there's going to be significant technology advancements in these types of vehicles over the next 5 to 10 years. And therefore, it's going to be really important to update this analysis and refresh it as technology changes. So similar to transit, the conclusion that we reached is that conversion to alternative fuels is technically feasible for much of the battery fleet, with battery electric provided for light and some medium duty vehicles. But for the heavy duty and specialized vehicles, the functionality is not available at this time. The feasibility analysis shows that there's an opportunity to reduce our emissions by a modest amount with some increase in costs, and it's therefore the recommended approach to move forward. The next steps that you can see on the slide are very similar to the next steps that were discussed for transit, and so I won't go through those. And with that, I would like to open the floor for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Bullock, for another very interesting presentation. Any questions for Ms. Bullock from the committee members? No? Any questions from members of council? Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Chair Rietma, and thank you for the presentation. Maybe I missed the answer. Maybe you said it, but I missed it. When you were using the various projections on lowering emissions, for example, you think you said 25% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2041. Is that reduction based on what we're now doing or what we're expected to be in 2041 as our population grows, if you know what I mean? I mean, we're going to be using whatever we're doing, we're going to have a lot more vehicles on the street.
Right. So we included the growth both for the transit fleet and for the corporate fleet in those numbers.
So yeah, but it's not a 25% reduction from what we have today. It's 25% reduction in what we would expect by 2041 if we didn't switch over. You know what I mean?
So it's a 25% reduction in terms of Anacia, help me out please. But we considered the growth in the vehicles okay, good question. Anacia, do you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah. So, sorry, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
That's great. So that 25% reduction is really, like you were saying, accounting for business as usual growing emissions with time. And so, again, it's comparing as if we would have done let's say, adapted the technology as per the plan of the study, let's say.
Right.
All right.
If I can just follow that up, is it a 25% reduction on what we're emitting today or what we would expect it to be emitting?
It's over the course, sorry, it's compared to the 2041 level, right? So by 2041, at the year 2041, we would reduce emissions if we were electric by 80%.
80% of what they are today?
Of what we would be if we kept the business as usual at year 2041.
With the business as usual, including the growth, the projected
okay,
growth.
Thanks. That's clear enough. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anacia.
Sure.
All right. Councilor Morales, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Ms. Chair Rietma. Ms. Bullock, a couple questions for this. The pilots are recommending doing this for transit fleet. What are the options if General Committee and then Council amended this to also do pilot projects for corporate fleet?
Well, I think the recommendations are contained in the report, and we will be dealing with those when we deal with the motions that come out of the staff report.
So through you, Chair Rietma, the question was for Ms. Bullock in terms from obviously we'll deal with that at General Committee. So amendments can be done then, but I'm wondering if she can provide clarity on the impact, like the staff saying, okay, if you guys do this later at General Committee, we recommend you don't do corporate fleet because of X, Y, and Z, or you could do it, but this is the cost implications, or we wouldn't have the resources. I'm just wondering from a staff perspective, what would be the comments? And we did get an email from Brent Forsyth, but over a week ago, it's recommending members to attend this meeting to kind of have a wholesome discussion. So that's why I'm asking the question here.
So our conclusions and next steps recommended pilots for both the corporate fleet and transit. And the reason for doing a pilot is that there's quite a significant change in maintenance and operation. And so having sort of a pilot project allows everybody to gain some experience, to understand what they're working with. And it's a really, it's an important piece that a lot of agencies follow from a change management perspective. Did I answer your question?
Yes, I think I'm missing some information. I have some counselors like helping me kind of find the clarity on this. So the pilot proposed includes corporate fleet as well. Does it include, Ms. Bullock, does it include bylaws specifically? For example, I know transits, I know the contract, the partnership with the contractor, they've got like a Ford Edge or something that I see once in a while. Does it include any kind of those vehicles, those vans that we have in fleet, or is the scope very broad right now? Barrie Fire comes to mind, fire prevention as well. I'm curious as to how detailed the proposal for the pilot is. And again, that might be detailed later in the staff report, or that maybe
yes,
that's
that detail, we didn't get into that level of detail in our report. It was simply a recommendation that there is a pilot, but we didn't work through and define the number or types of duration of the pilot or anything like that.
Okay.
Miller, you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Chair Rima. Councillor Morales, while Ms. Bullock did not give the details in the presentation, certainly the staff report does include some fleet options for a pilot, and the recommendation is to allow us to prepare the implementation strategy, which would provide those details. And some examples would be light duty trucks or cars would be definitely be possibilities for that implementation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Miller. Also, I'm on my phone, so I can only see 4 people at a time. So my apologies. I think you must have jumped in to provide clarity. And then I guess my final one is we saw that the city of Brampton kind of did a big kickoff on electric buses back in January, February. Are we connecting with them in terms of best practices? Kind of like, hey, you guys were the first out of the runway. What's going well? What turned out to be a disaster? What are you learning? So, because obviously we're a little bit behind them. That's fine. They've got a bigger population. They've got routes with more ridership. They've got economies of scale. But I'm just wondering if maybe we could leverage some sort of connection with their staff to essentially allow us to get to where we want to be quicker, in a more efficient way, since they've already, like, for them, it's not just a feasibility report. Like, the buses are, there's not many of them, but there might only be one, but the bus is on the streets and operational. Have we kind of connected with them?
And that was an important part of the project that we undertook as well. And so there was a best practices component to it where we reached out and interviewed a variety of different agencies to gain their lessons learned.
Are those ongoing channels, or was that just to develop the report?
I would defer to Barrie staff to answer that.
It would seem to me that as part of the report, it made sense for Ms. Bullock and WSP to do that work. But I'm sure that as we move forward, staff would very likely be in contact with Brampton and anybody else that might have those kind of buses, I would think.
Yeah,
James Reed, I saw you.
Thank you, Chair Rietma. Yes, just to Councillor Morales's question, for sure, we are working very closely with our partner agencies and other municipalities. And one of the motions in the staff report specifically has us joining a more formal group, which is called the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. And Brent Forsyth also is actively involved in OPTA, and that's been a really helpful organization for us on a variety of fronts to do with transit. So we are very much engaged and meeting with these other transit agencies to learn everything we can, particularly in some of the smaller ones like the City of Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Yeah. Perfect, Mr. James Reed, and I'll connect with Mr. Forsyth offline on that. Thank you, Chair Rima.
Okay, all right, and Councillor Elwin, I saw you.
Thanks, Councillor Rima, and thank you for that presentation, Ms. Bullock. So I'm looking at slide 13 and the different scenarios. that you looked at, and you went with scenario 3. Can you tell me a bit more about why you went with scenario 3 as opposed to the other scenarios? It looks like from this chart on slide 13 that scenario 4 probably would have the highest emissions reduction. And this is the corporate fleet part of the presentation, just to clarify that. So scenario 4 looks like it would probably have the largest emissions reduction. Was it just cost prohibitive? Do you have a bit more detail on why you didn't go with that scenario?
Yeah, it was done through discussion and conversation with City of Barrie staff, and it was decided that it was a more realistic solution than scenario 4. In addition, it made more sense because we weren't introducing another technology, which was the biodiesel. And the CNG. Oh, sorry, that was there's CNG in the other one. So we wanted to find a good solution that was also doable, and in terms of good products on the market. And this one we felt was going to provide savings because the number of battery electric vehicles, while still ensuring that the city services could be delivered safely and not introducing another fueling type.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's someone on our staff who had more detail. If not, that's totally fine, but you mentioned a conversation with them. So thank you for that answer.
All right, any more discussion on this presentation or questions? All right. Oh, Councillor Congo.
Thank you, Chair Rietma, and maybe for staff or for Mr. Forsyth on the line. So when we talk about a pilot, again, knowing some of that stuff will get flushed out, but I do have residents that give lots of great feedback around opportunities, around transit routes they take and otherwise. Would the pilot be something that we would already assume to be incorporating this into a current transit route, or would we use the pilot to actually look at different alternative routes and other efficiencies? Or is there anything at this time we can share about the scope of a pilot that would be considered? I wasn't sure if it was a new route and options, or if it was just incorporating it into the current transit system.
All right, Ms. Bullock, do you want to answer that, or is that one for Ms. Miller?
I will defer to Ms. Miller.
Actually, sorry.
It's not actually me at all.
All right.
This James Reed as transit.
All right.
Yeah, I was just going to say that Brent Forsyth is going to jump in and give you the details of the pilot, what's kind of anticipated.
All right. Mr. Forsyth.
Thanks, Chair Rietma, and through you to Councillor Kungle. We will still have time to plan out the exact details in terms of where it would be routed and whatnot. I wouldn't imagine us adding a new route. I would imagine us running it on routes throughout the city, and we'd likely run it on different routes, different times of the year. As Ms. Bullock said earlier in her presentation, a lot of what we're seeing in other areas are the impacts of climate, the impacts of topography, and unfortunately, the city of Barrie does have a lot of hills and a lot of cold weather. So we're probably going to run a bunch of different tests on it throughout the course of the pilot, so we can learn more about ranges and maintenance activities that would be associated with it. But what I would say is, pending council approval of the pilot, by the time we actually see a bus in service, it's probably going to be a couple years, depending on production time and whatnot. So we'll be reporting back to council far ahead of that with more detailed plans on what that would look like.
All right, Ms. Congo.
Follow-up. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Forsyth. So follow-up, not directly related, but as we get these really great learnings out of a potential pilot, and as we approach this transition, knowing that the school board, while they're not a direct service provider in any means, and we have no influence, are you at tables, or could you share anything when we look at the potential for that fleet? Some residents have commented to me that it's kind of a beautiful example of where they see the starting and stopping on bus routes and the recharge time frame between when you need a bus going to school and then picking kids up. So I didn't know if our learnings through the pilot or our conversations around the work that you're doing is shared with the school boards in any way in our region.
Through Chair Reitma, oh, sorry, thank you, Chair Reitma. Councillor Kungl, we have an ongoing discussion with the school boards, and by all means, we would share our our findings from this pilot with them. We don't have any control over what buses they purchase and whatnot. They also have a service provider who provides service on their behalf. But by all means, we would share any knowledge that we learned from the pilot or anything we learned through this whole process and across the further studies, for sure.
Great, this is exciting. Well done.
All right, any other questions, comments? Councillor Harvey.
Actually, first question will be for Brent. Just curious if part of this study, or if there will be some type of a study that would occur as to which brand of bus would be best to go with when it comes to distances and battery capacity.
Through Chair Reitma to Councillor Harvey. Thanks for the question. Yes, we're definitely going to have to decide on that. One of the, and further to, I guess, Councillor Morales' question earlier and Ms. James Reed's response, we've been working very closely with all of the agencies across Ontario who have piloted. In fact, TTC is one of the largest in North America, or is the largest in North America in terms of piloting, and they provide quarterly reports to their council. And what they're actually doing is they're comparing the brands of buses. So they have 4 different brands of buses, and they're comparing it from range to maintenance cost to all sorts of things. And so we watch those pretty closely, and we can already tell which ones are probably the higher performing for different reasons that may help factor into our bus brand. What I would also add is, depending on how we fund our pilot bus and our buses moving forward, anytime you get any sort of federal or provincial funding to help support that, which we're anticipating there's going to be a lot of that, you have to ensure there's a certain amount of Canadian content in each of those vehicles that are being manufactured. And right now, I believe there's only 2 in Canada. And so it would probably narrow it down to those 2 at this point. But we would go through a competitive bid and assess what's going on in the rest of the province to make sure that we're setting this up for success.
Great, that's great to hear, especially if we can piggyback off the TTC. It'll be much cheaper for them to run the experiment opposed to a smaller municipality like ourselves. Because I know when York Region started their pilot, even though they have an EV bus manufacturer or just an assembly plant, because the buses are actually coming from Asia, however, they did not go with that particular provider. My next question is for the presenter. I'm just curious, when it came to the CO2 emissions and the percentages that you cite in your report, was things like the impact of the batteries and the recycling processes encompassed in those percentages?
Anasia, can you answer, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the question. We actually looked at what we call the well-to-wheel emissions. So really, how is the electricity produced, how it is generated, how it's going to be generated in Ontario in the next 20 years, which actually gets worse and worse. And then looking at the diesel utilization for diesel heating in the winter. But we did not take into account battery recycling and basically like creating the components and because that's a whole life cycle analysis that in and of itself can be a study and it's quite complex, and right now there's a lot of development in this field. So the short answer is no, we didn't take that into account. We really looked at how was the electricity produced and how much diesel was going to be needed
to add to that, we are seeing new business models in the market as well, where they are looking at sort of battery rental. So it's returned to the manufacturer or leased. Mm-hmm. So there's all sorts of different things happening with batteries, and I expect as well with the provincial budget that there's going to be a lot of growth in Ontario in that space. Just
by chance, do we have an idea of what type of footprint the manufacturing process of these large batteries do have on the environment?
It is very hard to say. It really much depends on where most of the elements are being gathered. And so there's no clear answer as for now. There are more and more pilot projects and pilot recycling projects that are happening around Canada, even in Quebec. And so, the more these pilot factories develop, the least our impacts is going to be. And, with mass productions, we also are able to have optimize the systems. And so, we can only think that it's going to get better and better, but we don't have a clear answer as of for now. What's the impact of these batteries?
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Chair Rietma.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from anybody? We certainly are at the early stages of this technology, and there's no wonder there's lots of questions about that. And I think that we've got a ways to go. One comment that I would want to make, Mr. Forsyth, and I know that you work with the school boards. I have never understood why we have two operators operating two systems of busing. And I know that you've had some discussions with the school board in terms of trying to put those systems together so we're not duplicating services. And I think that is also one area where we really can save some money and also do something good for climate. So I would encourage that discussion to continue. All right, anything else? All right, well, thank you, Ms. Bullock and your whole team for a very interesting discussion. We have a couple of motions, one on the fleet and one on the corporate fleet that we will deal with shortly. But first, I would like to deal with the advisory committees. We have 3 advisory committee reports that we need to receive. One of them, the first one is the Heritage Barrie Committee, May the 12th. The next one is the Community in Blooms Committee, May the 20th, and the report of the Active Transportation and Sustainability Committee of June the 1st. Can I have a member of the committee put those on the floor, please? Thank you, Councillor Kungl. Any questions or discussion on those reports? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. There's one recommendation that comes out of the Heritage Barrie report, and that recommendation is to do with the Collier Street United Church, 112 Collier Street, that the property known municipally as Collier Street United Church located at 112 Collier Street be added to the Municipal Heritage Register as a listed property. Can I have somebody put that on the floor, please? Thank you, Councillor Kungl. Any discussion on that, or questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call the motion. Those in favor?
Oh, Councillor,
sorry,
sorry.
I just see Mr. Councillor Morales. Sorry.
Sorry, my apologies. I'm just jumping in here. This is the one beside the 111 Mulcaster building. Is that correct?
No, 111 Mulcaster. I'm not sure what 111 Mulcaster is.
The staff member, is this the one essentially beside the BMO?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm just going off the address facing there. I guess to staff, I'm wondering, I don't know if this might go to Ms. Banfield. Ms. Banfield, obviously that church obviously has some sort of heritage significance. That said, the building that was built on its property decades ago is newer, and I'm wondering if this committee and then council ratifies the heritage designation, would it affect any redevelopment potential on the site if the church chooses to do that moving forward in the future in terms of further intensification like the building it built behind?
Perhaps I can answer that. This is not a designation of the property. It's only a listing. So it's this is a building of historical interest, but it does not regulate demolition or anything like that. not designation.
So there's a Chair Reitman, through you to you. There's a difference between designation and listing.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, so listing would affect its ability to be renovated and things of that nature, but it wouldn't affect demolition, or listing doesn't even affect renovation. It's just kind of list, like, I guess, just puts it on the list and acknowledges it.
Yes, that's, I saw Andrea Miller jump on there. I don't know whether she would prefer to answer that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Reitman, just to allow you to do your chair duties, and staff can give the technical piece. Councillor Morales, this is a listing on the municipal register, and so as Councillor Reitman has said, it has no bearing in terms of designation, doesn't change anything in terms of Planning Act, it doesn't change anything with respect to development potential. It's simply a recognition that the Heritage Committee felt it is something of interest for the community, and there would be no further impact. If it was designated under the Heritage Act, that's when we would be getting into challenges with respect to development applications that would need to be considered.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much.
That helps. All right, thank you. All right. Any further discussion on this? Questions? No? All right. So the motion is on the floor as printed. Those in favor? Show. Thank you. Nobody opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. All right. Now we come to the recommendations on the alternative fuel study. The first one is the corporate fleet motion. So can I have somebody put that on the floor? Thank you, Councillor Kungl. All right. It's as printed. Do I need to read it, or are you okay? You can read yourself. All right. Any comments or discussion? Councillor Elwin.
Thank you, Chair Reitma. I do just want to follow up with staff on the question I asked during the presentation around the other scenario presented in the report by WSP that includes biodiesel as well, and a potentially higher emissions reduction as a result. So I'm not sure which staff member can answer this. Ms. Miller.
Sorry, Councillor Elwin, Ms. Oakley is on the line, and she was the manager who was involved on the corporate fleet side. So I'll ask her to give you the details that you're looking for.
That's great. Yeah, I basically would like to know if there's any opportunity going forward for us to further explore the potential for that option, considering the option that's on the table right now is well below what our climate targets require of us in terms of emission reduction.
Ms. Oakley, would you like to tackle that one?
Sure, Councillor Reitma, I will give it a shot through you to Councillor Elwin. So WSP did, as part of their study, do some high-level analysis on all of those scenarios, including cost and emissions, but just not to the extent. And the emissions and cost results for scenario 3 and 4 were actually quite close, with scenario 4 costing a little bit more, giving us a little bit more emissions, but then, as per Ms. Bullock's note, it introduced that third technology. And also, as we've noted in the report, while the functionality for the heavy duty vehicles isn't currently available in the marketplace, we do expect that that will change over time. So, I guess we were thinking, let's take the light duty, the medium duty conversions at this time, and then monitor those opportunities for the heavy duty in the future, where we might actually be able to get more emissions than we would with the biodiesel.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I think I see scenario 3 as being sort of the current low-hanging fruit, and I think Tesla and others are looking at trucks, electrifying them as well, and I think that in 10 years we'll certainly see some more technology there that will help us out as well. All right, any more discussion on item 6.1, the corporate fleet recommendation? All right. Other members of council, no questions? Okay. All right, those, I'll put it on to call the motion. Those in favor? And nobody's opposed. That's great. Thank you. That's carried. And then the second recommendation has to do with the, again, the alternative fuel study for Barrie Transit. And I won't read it all, but it's there it is as printed. Any questions or comments or discussion on that one? Not from the committee members or from members of council. Ms. Cook here.
You need to put it on the floor.
Yes, I realize that. Yes, Ms. Kung, thank you, Councillor Kungle. All right. No discussion, further discussion on that. So those in favor? Thank you, that carries. All right. And then we have the confidential memorandum. And I wanted to know, like, if we're going to have a discussion about this one, then we need to go on camera. But if we don't have any discussion, then we can simply adopt that and carry on. Any need to go on camera? Any discussion? Could I have somebody put it on the table?
I'll move.
Thank you, Councillor Kungle. And those in favor? Thank you, that's carried. All right, that brings us to the end of this meeting. Thank you very much. We are now adjourned, and I guess we'll see you in 52 minutes for planning. So have a good evening, everybody.